market.
Gabriel Bergmoser is a published author, a playwright, and the co-founder of Bitten by Productions. He's my guest today on Tête-à-tête. Thank you so much for joining me, Gabriel.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you here today.
Well, I hope I can live up to the excitement.
Okay, let's start with the playwriting, because that's really where you started for your professional career, isn't it?
Not intentionally. It was something that I kind of stumbled into a little bit towards the end of high school. So I studied drama at school. I was lucky enough to be exposed to some really seminal works, particularly in Australian theatre when I was growing up. Through my school, we got to go and see a lot of plays at MTC, at Malthouse, at things like that. I built a very rudimentary understanding of what constituted a good play, how to construct it, and for me, my first play was when I was 18, and it wasn't great, but I think there were enough moments in there that I looked at it and thought, actually, I'm not that bad at this. Like, I kind of had a sort of reasonable handle on how to write dialogue that seemed fairly natural and was kind of fairly entertaining. When I was lucky enough to have them put on, I would sort of, learn from that process. And from there, hit a bit of a stride in terms of regularly bringing out new plays.
What then do you think makes a good play?
I actually think in theatre, what you need more than anything else is strong dialogue and strong characters, because there are going to be more than a few plays, particularly when you're starting out, where essentially you have a blank space stage, sometimes like a tiny little stage, you only have a few actors, and it's your job to, using only the most rudimentary basics, to actually tell a story that is compelling and pulls people in. So theatre, there's a reason that I think theatre is largely seen as a writer's medium, because it does rely so much on having characters that are compelling, on having themes that speak to people, on having a plot that can reel people in and have people wanting to find out what happens next.
So you started out with writing plays. How did Bitten by come into existence?
Accidentally. So I'd written this short play called Reunion that basically was about a bunch of high school friends who get together for a drink 5 years after they've all seen each other for the last time and everything goes wrong. But they all kind of think, oh, we're all so grown up now, we're all so different, let's see how... But the moment they're back in each other's company, they regress and they start acting like children again, and all of their past grudges and issues and fights and stuff all kind of start bubbling up again. So, it's by no means like a super ambitious play. It was very simple. But I'd written it, it was sort of quite personal, and I had seen quite a lot of people who I knew in Melbourne at the time were moving into independent theatre. And I thought, well, if they can do it, then why not me? So at the time I was working at Dracula's, the since closed down theatre restaurant, and there were a few actors there who I knew who would be interested in doing something. And so there were sort of 5 of us in the play, and we'd meet in my garage and sort of, fumble it through that way. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just sort of, making it up as I went along. And I didn't feel strong-minded enough to, step in there and kind of, in my head, they all thought the play was terrible and they were just being polite. And then the play kind of came out and did okay. Like it didn't break any records or, change anybody's lives, but people reacted well and we got some reviews that were quite favourable. And this real crystallizing moment of, I remember walking out on stage after closing night and just thinking, oh, we did it. Like it worked. And then from there, we just sort of became Bitten by Productions and started kind of putting on more and more plays.
Where did the name Bitten by come from?
It's an open secret that I've always hated the name Bitten by Productions. It came about because we all worked at Dracula's and we met there. And at the end of every Dracula show, they would say, whoever was the lead on stage would come out and say, you've just been bitten by, and then list off all the cast members. And I think we're all sitting in the pub trying to work out a name for it. And Justin and Ashley, who co-founded the company with me, we were all Jaws fans. So Ash suggested Bitten by Productions. And in my head, I was like, well, that can be a placeholder. Now we're stuck with it. We've done 17 plays under that name, so it's not going anywhere, unfortunately.
Where I went in my head was, I'm bitten by theatre.
Yeah, and I think a few people make that assumption because it's probably the only logical assumption to make.
Oh, okay.
But no, it's a Dracula's reference.
Because now Bitten by has quite a large production staff.
Yeah.
Why is that, and how did that happen?
Well, over the years, we sort of had a bit of a rotating committee that was quite informal. The core of it was always Justin, Ashley, and myself as kind of the 3 co-founders and the people who were kind of driving the early plays. We had people who we worked with who we really liked, and we sort of brought them in on a kind of informal basis as sort of, somebody who was on the committee and who was there to help make decisions. And eventually it kind of got whittled down to sort of the 5 key committee members who we have now. And we've had other people who came and went in that time, but essentially the people who are now there are the people who've basically been involved the longest, who've been involved in the most plays, and who've kind of helped shape the creative direction of the company over the last few years.
Okay, so your creative direction is discussed by your committee.
Yes.
What else does that committee do?
We're moving more and more in a direction where Bitten By for a long time was predominantly my work, and now we're bringing in more and more work from new up-and-coming playwrights, which is what ultimately we want the company to be. We want it to be a platform for story and character-driven theatre that maybe wouldn't get a look in somewhere else. A lot of like the trends, particularly in independent theatre at the moment, are very non-naturalistic, are very out there, are very sort of, for want of a better word, artsy, and I think we're sort of driven more by a love of just telling a really good story as best as we can. So, we sort of look at scripts that come in and we decide between us whether we think it suits the company's ethos or if we think this is a playwright we can work with. I strongly believe, and I think we all strongly believe in a director's autonomy. So once we have a director on board and once that director kind of has a clear vision, we basically make ourselves as available or as not available as the director wants us to be. We sort of let them do their thing. Obviously, for that to work, the key is to find the right director, and that's part of what the committee does, is we meet with directors, we talk to them, and then we decide amongst ourselves if these are people we want to go forward with.
So the committee decides on which plays you're going to do.
Yep.
The director.
Yep.
The director then...
Venue as well.
The venue, okay, as well, okay. What about funding? Where does the funding come from?
We're self-funded entirely. We've never gotten any arts funding or anything.
Have you tried?
We've looked into it, but it's very, very competitive, and there are lots of stipulations and stuff, and we've found that we've managed to operate at a reasonably high standard without having to resort to that, and that gives us creative autonomy, which I think we really, really like.
Yep.
For a long time, we did a lot of very, very lo-fi plays, plays at places like Club Voltaire or the Butterfly Club, where it was essentially just people against a curtain, and that's, what I referred to before. Stories that kind of had to rely on the strength of the script and the strength of the acting in order to sort of transcend the limitations of their very low-budget productions. In 2017, early 2017, we had a massive hit with Springsteen, which was my Bruce Springsteen biopic play that did really, really well and cost absolutely nothing to put on. And we did that at a small venue in Melbourne, but it turns out people really like Bruce Springsteen. I thought I was the only one, but we got a lot of Springsteen fans in, and we sort of sold out the whole season. But really, the show was just a plain stage, 5 people, and there was really nothing else. So no money was spent on it, and it ended up making a lot. And so that essentially gave us the freedom to put a lot more money into our next play, which was Dracula, The Last Voyage of the Demeter. And then that did really well too. It was kind of like a if you build it, they will come type thing, We sort of had more and more shows like We Can Work It Out, the Beatles one we did for Fringe last year, Moonlight and The Trial of Dorian Gray, both which we did for Midsummer. We found that if you put those name quantities at festivals, they tend to do really well financially and bring sort of a lot of people in. And through that, we found that the plays have started making just enough money after you've paid all your actors and everything to sort of fund the next play and the next play and the next play. And so we're trying to be a bit strategic in terms of putting known quantities at festivals where they'll get a lot of eyes on them, but also still doing kind of those low budget shows that do rely purely on acting and writing. So weirdly, if people know what the play's about, they're a lot more interested in seeing it. So don't know why that is, but anyway, here we are.
Have you done any touring with any of them?
We took We Can Work It Out on a regional tour last year, and that did really well. So we had a sold out audience in Mansfield, which is my hometown, and that was really fun. Our play Heroes from 2 or 3 years ago, that went on the one-act play circuit, on the video one-act play circuit, and won quite a few awards, which was another really legitimizing moment for us.
Tell me about that circuit, because I don't know anything about that one.
It's Victorian Drama League's one-act play circuit, and basically, they have a series of one-act play festivals every year. So at all kinds of regional locations, like Mansfield was one. Then you've got a lot of different places, and basically Heroes was a play that didn't do super well in terms of audience numbers in Melbourne, but was really, really well reviewed. It was a 2-person show, so Matt and Blake just kind of went around and did all the performances off their own back. They just had the minimal set in the back of Matt's car, and they just dropped in. And I think it ended up winning Best Production at all but one of the festivals, which was really, really awesome. And just for the work that those guys did, it was amazing. And it was their idea. We funded it and we just sort of let them go crazy, and it did really well for us. The one weekend I did go was a great time. I wish I could have gone to more of them, but by all accounts, Matt and Blake had an awesome time doing it.
So those are not the only awards that your work has won, though. Tell me about the Sir Peter Ustinov Award.
I still have to pinch myself a little bit when I think about it. So the Peter Ustinov Award is an international screenwriting award run by the International Emmys that's open to screenwriters under 30. And basically, I entered my pilot script, Windmills, that I'd written as my final for my master's at VCA. As anybody who's a writer knows, you know, there are a lot of those competitions out there, and you enter a lot of them. You're almost like constantly entering stuff, and you get extremely used to that. Those very politely phrased, the quality of the entrants were all very high this year, but unfortunately, you know, it normally takes to like the second paragraph to get to the thanks but no thanks part. So you get very used to those, and you know, it's what you expect when you sort of see the email come through, you know, the subject heading being like, your Peter Ustinov entry. And so when that kind of came through, I was like, okay, cool, so it'll be a rejection. Then I opened it, I've been shortlisted. And I think that kind of came at a really important time for me, in that, you know, I'd been doing theatre for a few years already. I mean, I've been doing theatre since I was about 20 in terms of writing it. And I finished my master's, and then I've been left thinking, what do I do now? Like, there's no clear signs of career progression happening anywhere. I kind of don't know how to leverage what I've got here, which is a master's and a bunch of playwriting experience, most of it, you know, more error than trial. But when that kind of came through, that was like the validation I needed. But I didn't for a second think I would actually win. I mean, I hoped I would privately. I mean, I sort of said to everyone, oh no, it's okay if I don't, but I really wanted to win. And then, yeah, one morning just got the phone call, like woke up to the phone call from America saying, you know, very casually, Mr. Bergmoser, just letting you know that you've won the Sir Peter Ustinov Award. And I'm sitting there like frozen, forgetting how to speak English, just kind of, you know, babbling into the phone and not even having any idea of if any of what I was saying was remotely coherent. It wasn't. But then, you know, it's one of those things, you know, stuff like that happens, and it's like somewhere along the line someone stuffed up, and you're going to find out, like, as you're getting on the plane, oh, sorry, it was an error, the real person's coming now, go home. But none of that happens, and I basically was flown to the International Emmys, and I was there for a weekend, and then had this like whirlwind trip where I ended up going to LA for a week afterwards and taking meetings with all kinds of people, and it was huge and sort of like life-changing. But then you get to the end of that trip and suddenly you're just back in Melbourne working sales, living your life again, struggling to make rent, just like, and you know, the estimation of the degree to which I thought that would change my life was very far off from the degree to which it actually did.
You had just submitted that same script for your master's. Yeah. How did it go with the master's?
It did really well in the end.
I would hope so.
Well, yeah. But they were good marks. I sort of felt one of the most vindicating things about the Ustinov was that the script that won was a project that I'd been working on for a long, long time. I'd originally written it as a novel when I was in high school. That novel became my first play that was performed by the Youth Theatre Company. And then I even self-published a version of it in 2012 really badly with, like, you know, lumpy pixelated books that, you know, I think made it into like one secondhand bookstore somewhere. And otherwise I just sort of kept a box in my room and gave them to people. But you know, it was this project that I couldn't, and I think every writer has that one project that you just can't get rid of. And this project, Windmills, was that one for me. VCA is a very strong test of a script because you have to go through so many rewrites and so many reworkings that it's very easy to reach a place eventually where any passion that you once had is gone. You can no longer really see what it was that you loved about this script or what made you convinced that this was something you really wanted to do. And so in my break between my first and my second year of VCA, I sort of went back to the drawing board a bit. And I thought, well, why not do Windmills? You know, I mean, it's been sitting there for a while. I haven't really done anything with it. In my last semester, against the advice of everybody involved at VCA, I, you know, went back to the drawing board and started a whole new project and it was all right because, you know, I sort of already knew Windmills quite intimately, having worked on it for that long and to that extent. But I sort of spent that last semester just like, you know, really working on that and sort of reworking that script until eventually I had a pilot I was really happy with. And then I remember even sort of telling friends at the time who, you know, had known me since school and had read the very first draft of Windmills, oh, you know, I'm working on a new version of Windmills. And they're like, could you just not? Like, just stop, let go of it. It's never going to go anywhere. And like, so many people said that to me. They were like, you've got to let go of Windmills. And I was like, I can't, I know I haven't got it right yet. And then it got me a ticket to the Emmys. So it was like almost, you know, when I got handed that award, I remember looking at it, and the most vindicating thing wasn't seeing my name on it, it was seeing the name Windmills on it and thinking, after all these years of working on that story, it has got me somewhere. The Ustinov was a very strong indicator that there was something there and that there was potential in the project.
Okay, so what form? It was a film?
TV pilot.
TV pilot,
yeah.
Okay.
So it was the first episode.
Okay, great. So that's a TV pilot that you've got under your belt.
Yeah.
You've got a number of plays under your belt. what other kind of writing? You've also done novels.
Yes.
Have you done films as well?
No, well, funnily enough, I've actually got no film credits at all. I've got, I had a couple of web series pilots that went into development but didn't end up getting released. I'm currently working on a web series adaptation of my play Heroes with Balloon Tree Productions. They're a Melbourne-based production company, and they've optioned the rights for that. And so we've had like several writers' room sessions with those scripts. So I've been working with a team of writers to sort of develop a 6-part web series adaptation of that I'm really excited by. So if all goes well, that'll hopefully go into production later this year. But Heroes is looking really good. But apart from that, I mean, yeah, I've written for screen, but I've never had anything produced for screen.
Okay.
So all of my sort of,
Yet to come.
yeah, hopefully, we'll see.
So what's the process that you have for writing a play?
And well, I mean, it starts with an idea, like anything. And that idea could come from anywhere. I mean, it could come from, I've had dreams that I've turned into stuff. I've had, what if scenarios in my day-to-day life. I mean, Reunion, my first play, came from, I guess, essentially missing my high school friends and thinking what would happen if we all got back together and hung out again for this night and we're in the same room again, and all that unfinished business suddenly has to be finished, and so on and so forth. Then there are other plays that are based very explicitly on personal life experience of, something I've kind of been through. Once I've kind of got a rough idea of what the story is going to look like, and I've sort of written a kind of beat for beat breakdown of the major events, I like to know a few goalposts about where I'm heading, but then sort of let the story tell itself in the writing, because there are so many times when you'll be writing something and you'll realize, oh, that's what happens, or that's what happens, or the way you thought a thing was going to end is not the way it actually is going to end, and you have to be flexible enough to kind of go down that road and sort of discover where the story is trying to take you, which often is in a very different place to where you thought it was trying to take you.
Okay, so you're much more organic than, say, doing the 3-act scenario and the turning points and the yada yada.
Look, yeah, to a degree. I mean, I definitely use structure. I used to hate structure, like in just on principle, because I always saw it as like writing by numbers. Somebody pointed out to me that's like, no, you do use structure, because your story has your inciting incident. There is the first act turning point. There is all of those things that you get taught at film school. We use them anyway. The question is how well we use them, because it's just a natural way to tell a story. You've got a beginning, you've got a middle, you've got an end. That's 3-act structure. Congratulations, you've learnt it. So it's actually like, what I tend to do is to feel the story out with, again, those kind of rough beats of sort of knowing where the climax is, what this point is, what this point is. And then when I am redrafting, that's when I'll kind of look at it from a structural standpoint and look at it from, all right, this is my first act, this is my second act, this is my third act, how are they all working for each other? I don't overthink it, or I don't sort of, go in there and say, oh no, if my midpoint's not at exactly the middle, or, if I don't have a really clearly delineated second act turning point or whatever, I don't force those things in there inorganically if it doesn't feel like they should be in there.
How do you write dialogue?
Dialogue is an interesting one, because obviously it's so important to writing plays.
Yes.
And it is important that it's naturalistic, but I would argue not necessarily important that it's realistic.
Yes.
Because for example, when we were at VCA, we did this exercise where we had to record a snippet of conversation from out in the world. It could be, somebody on a tram, it could be a conversation you had at home, it could be anything, to record it, to transcribe it, and to bring it in. And anyway, so everyone's reading out these examples of dialogue, and one of the students, and it was something that was really embarrassing at the time, but he'd recorded a conversation I was having with another student over lunch, and he'd been sitting there recording it, which I didn't know about. And so he's reading out the most awkward, fumbled through conversation between two people who didn't know each other, with ums and ahs and awkward pauses and repeated thoughts and half-finished thoughts and all of that. And you realize that in dialogue that is realistic would be quite tedious to listen to and quite difficult to listen to. I think verisimilitude isn't necessarily that important if it gets in the way of you actually telling a compelling, interesting, and entertaining story. I mean, the writers who I look to for dialogue that I find really entertaining or really great are people like Mike McDonough, the cliches Quentin Tarantino, which I'm sure that some of my peers would kick me for, but I love listening to that. I love the way they write dialogue. And also Richard Linklater in his Before trilogy. That's dialogue that seems very naturalistic and seems, you listen to it and you think, oh, that's how people talk, but it's not. Nobody's that articulate. No. But that's why we go to the movies or we go to the theater. We don't necessarily go to see mundanities of real life reflected back at us. I think dialogue can be very entertaining. Aaron Sorkin is another great example, where nobody speaks like that, but that's fine, because I would rather my dialogue be entertaining than realistic.
Yep. How many iterations do your plays go through?
that, and this is very rare, but there are some where, I sort of finish it and I pretty much say, oh, that's more or less what I wanted to do right from the start. And they kind of undergo a few revisions, but not that much. There are other ones that, get largely and heavily rewritten depending on sort of where they finish up. Usually when I'm reasonably happy with something, I'll do a table read with a few actors. I'll kind of hear it out loud. And I'll always know at the end of that read, if I can make eye contact with everyone around the table, then I'm like, okay, I've done all right. But if I can't, I'm like, all right, this one's going back to the drawing board. So you sort of have to get that instinct for, is this landing? Is this working the way I want it to? All of those things.
One of the plays that you've written that I'm aware of is The Critic. And that, I think, was based on one of your own experiences of being a critic yourself.
Yes.
So what was that experience like, and what's your response to getting a bad review?
I'm uniquely placed in this conversation in having received the worst review of all time. This is people who know me know this story very well, and I bring it up probably more than I should for somebody who claims to be okay with it, but it is because it's a learning curve, and I would say it is actually one of the key moments of my career, was waking up after opening night of this play and reading what to this day I still believe is the most vitriolic review I've ever read of anything, let alone one of my plays, but of anything. This critic was going on and on about how my work was amateurism run rampant. The play exhibited all this insouciance and effrontery and all words I didn't know. So I'm sitting there reading it and being like, I don't even know what you're saying. You're just using a lot of really scary words that just kind of makes me feel like even more of a failure. And it really, really stung. And for a few days, I was telling anyone who would listen that it was wrong. But as anybody who, has reckoned with a bad review will know, bad reviews only hurt if you know they're right. And I've had bad reviews since that I read and I'm just like, I just don't agree with that. Like, your arguments don't make sense. I don't think that's true. I can point to examples of why what you're saying here and here is wrong. Sometimes you have the response of being like, did you even watch the play? There are cases where I do think critics kind of go in with an agenda, or they bring their own personal agendas to bear, or they go in and they talk more about what they wanted the play to be rather than what it was. They reckon with, I think the play should have been this, this, and this, and they don't actually engage with what the play was actually doing. And we saw that with The Trial of Dorian Gray in a couple of reviews that were quite critical of the play's handling of themes that the play didn't handle. So you sort of react being like, but that's not what we were talking about, and that's not what we were trying to achieve. I looked at it being like, that the play that you're reviewing is not the play I was trying to write. And you just have to decide in the end whether you want to take that on board or not, because ultimately it's up to you. You can raise a figurative middle finger at a critic and tell them that they're wrong and get offended and get upset and walk off in a huff about it, or you can look at it and you can really interrogate whether you actually think it has something worthwhile to say. And then if it does have that, you take that on board and you learn from it. But my personal experiences of being a critic ultimately led to me stopping being a critic, because I realized that the Melbourne scene is small. And my naive mistake in a lot of instances was thinking that the people who I was reviewing were professionals and would be okay with me being honest, and they were not. And they reacted really badly. I thought it'd be a really worthwhile endeavor to actually, to interrogate and dissect plays myself and to go and see more theater. If you're writing for a website, you get free tickets to stuff, and that's really good. And so, I went through a period of getting to see a lot of plays and getting to engage intellectually with what I thought worked and didn't work about it, which I thought was a fairly worthwhile pursuit. So that informed The Critic, the play, in that I sort of wanted to explore those experiences, but I also wanted to explore it from both sides. So The Critic is a play about a young writer who's become a theatre critic, and she gets sent to review a play that a friend of hers wrote, which turns out to be awful. And basically she gets the choice, do I give the play a good review to help my friends, or do I give it a bad review, be honest, and potentially ruin the friendship? Knowing that if I give it a good review, that could tank my career before it's even started, because I've given an endorsement to a play that really sucks. And so the play kind of, dramatizes the main characters' struggle with that dilemma, but then it also kind of explores it from the perspective of the creative person herself when, the review, spoiler alert, the review comes out and it is bad, how she reacts to it and sort of what that does to their friendship, and the growth that both those characters have to go on in kind of realizing that, that just because somebody had an opinion about a work that you've made doesn't make that person a bad person. The theatre critic who I mentioned before who wrote that savage review of my play, he's since reviewed several of my plays and given them really positive reviews, so that was vindicating to a degree. But I still get scared every time he comes in, like every time I see him come into one of my plays, like I know him by sight now. But the thing is, and this is kind of something the critic explores, I think that is so valuable, because a critic's job, I believe, on some degree, is to hold hold theatre makers to account.
Yes.
And I think that's so important. I think it's so important that you have voices out there that challenge you, that won't accept mediocrity and will call you out on that. And, you know, if you are being lazy, if you are being slack, if you are dealing with sensitive topics and you have dealt with them badly, I think that artists need to be called out on that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's okay. And I think there's no point in getting angry and railing at a critic if you haven't done the work. And if you know you haven't done the work, then it's on you to make sure that the next time you do the work.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great experience, really.
It was performed previously in 2016 and it's opening in September this year for Melbourne Fringe. It'll be a whole new cast. It won't be very much like the original version. It's being directed by Rose Flanagan. It'll be her first play as a director, but she's already exhibited an incredible vision, incredible ability to work with actors, and I'm really, really excited to see what she does with it.
And where's it going to be on?
It'll be at the Butterfly Club. So I think the Fringe program's coming out in the next couple of weeks or something. So.
And you're looking at doing a bit of a country run?
Yeah, there'll be a regional tour right afterwards. So we're still finalising dates for that. But I think it'll be maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the Melbourne season closes, so right after Fringe itself actually finishes.
Good, yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
We haven't even started to talk about your novels. So tell me about writing the novels, and we'll start with the Boone novels, maybe.
Yeah, Boone Shepherd was originally a story that I wrote when I was in high school in year 11, and I kind of wrote it as a bit of a tribute to, you know, at the time I was a teenager, I was very into Hunter S. Thompson, to Jack Kerouac, into that kind of thing, but I'd also sort of discovered, you know, the music of the Beatles at the time. I was into like a lot of 60s counterculture type things, and basically I kind of wanted to write a story that was a bit of a pastiche and a tribute to that, but I was 16, I didn't know how to do it, so what I wrote was really bad. But I always kind of loved the character of Boone, who was this character who basically was a sort of swashbuckling investigative journalist in this sort of steampunky, strange, out there version of the 1960s, and he rode around the countryside solving crimes and mysteries, and they were all like a little bit ridiculous, a little bit over the top, but basically what you learned as the story went on was that Boone Shepherd was actually a time traveller from the 1800s who's escaped the present day after a case went badly wrong. And I'd always had a real soft spot for those stories, even though they weren't very good, and I'd always had a real soft spot for the character of Boone. And so I sort of ended up revisiting it in, I think, 2013. I sort of started working on the story again and sort of thought, you know, well, I've learned a lot about writing since then. I think I can have another run at this and kind of, you know, sand down the rough edges and really sort of find what it was meant to be. And so I ended up writing 5 novels about him that ended up getting merged into 3 and then eventually got published by Belfrog Books, who are an independent publisher. And they really gave a huge amount of support to Boone. They got it out there. It got shortlisted for the Readings Young Adult Prize, which meant that we sold books, which was really nice. The podcast company I used to be involved in, Sans Pants Radio, they released the audiobook version of it. So it actually ended up reaching an audience of kind of thousands worldwide through that, which was really cool. So, and I got sent pictures of kids dressed up as Boone Shepherd for Book Week, and there were kids who would come up to me and tell me how much they loved Boone, how many times they'd read it and everything. Wow. And that was like, in its limited way, I think that book struck a chord with particularly young readers in a way that I found extremely gratifying. And, you know, so the final book in the series came out last November, and it was actually quite a hard thing to let go of Boone Shepherd after sort of, you know, 10 years of working on, or in varying degrees, kind of working on the story and working on the character, and then sort of reaching a point where, in a way that I don't want to spoil for people who haven't read the book yet, but the ending, I think, really underlined thematically what the series was all about. You know, you're aware that you have to say goodbye to those characters, and you've spent a long time kind of falling in love with these characters. They feel very real to you, and, you know, then they ride off into the sunset and that's it, and they're gone. And, you know, that was a surprisingly difficult thing to grapple with.
And you've done that, and you've got some new books that you've been working on.
Yes.
And one of the things that's interesting for me in that is that you're actually transitioning to a female protagonist.
Yes, for my next novel, which is coming out mid next year. And that it's funny because Maggie came about kind of by accident. Like I think so much of what I've done has come about. But Maggie originally came about in the short story that I wrote for Sans Pants Radio. And so I'd written this short horror story, basically introduced this character where she was kind of a supporting character, and then halfway through the main character died and she sort of took over. I did the psycho thing. And I realized as I was writing her, I was like, I really, really like you. Like as I was writing her, I just realized that she's one of those rare characters that you occasionally stumble on in your life who just write themselves, who just, you know, they just pretty much dictate exactly how they would react when a given situation, exactly what they would do. Like the force of personality I felt from her when kind of writing her just sort of, you know, shot off the page. And I found myself thinking I really want to revisit her. So I sort of revisited her in a couple of short stories and a novella that I wrote sort of afterwards. And then I went back and I expanded that short story into the full novel, which is now going to be published. And I've also written the sequel to that as well, which will be published the year after. That I'm not going to get bored of this character anytime soon. Like, there's so much more I want to explore about her, and there's so much about her that is still mysterious to me, which means I want to kind of find out, and I want to sort of, you know, take her to all kinds of different places and see what happens. It's weird because she's almost like Boone Shepherd was a heroic, swashbuckling hero who would always do the right thing, even if he wasn't very good at it. But Maggie, she's similar to him in some ways, in that she's still a nomadic kind of vigilante type character. But the difference between Maggie and Boone that I find really gratifying to explore is that Maggie doesn't have limits, whereas Boone does. There are things Boone would not do. Oh, okay. Maggie will do anything. Right. Maggie will do anything in achieving what she believes is right, but she will. There is a moment in the first book that I deliberately had in there as like the test. When I was meeting with publishers about it, I always brought up that moment to see how they reacted, because I knew that if any publisher says, "Oh, that moment has to go," then they'd be the wrong publisher for it. And luckily none of them did. The publishers who were interested all really, in fact, a lot of them just brought that moment up unprompted by me. They were just like, "Oh, and I love that moment." But it's a moment where Maggie does something really horrendous to get out of a situation. It's the only option she has in that moment. But she does something that is like, you know, Hannibal Lecter level of like, you read it and you go, "Oh God." She has a moral code, but it's a very loose moral code. And she is willing to do what has to be done for the greater good. And writing a character who isn't bound by rules and who isn't bound by a conventional sense of morality, but is still trying to do the right thing and still trying to help people in need, I found really, really interesting as a protagonist.
Now, you've mentioned that those most recent books have been picked up by a publisher. Can you just tell me about the process of getting that to happen and getting an agent? And
I've been agentless for about a year before I signed with my current agent. I had an agent shortly after I went to America who I ended up leaving. The relationship wasn't really working out mutually, and so anyway, that was kind of where it ended. But shortly after that, I was put in touch with an agent through a friend of mine who I sent some work to, and she was a very well-known agent. She's represented some really huge books. And so I kind of realized very early on that if I was going to sign with another agent, I wanted it to be her. And so I sort of sent her some early stuff. She was like, "I like it, but it's not quite there." And so I kind of went back to drawing board a couple of times, and then she eventually signed me on the back of this book. That was kind of all I was aiming for. Like, all I wanted was to sign with this agent because I knew they were really good. And then she even warned me at the time. She was like, "Just be aware that the degree of violence and the subject matter in this book might put off a lot of the major publishers." So she said, "Look, we can send it to some smaller publishers, we can see what they think, but I don't think you're going to get much traction from the bigger publishers." And I was completely understanding of that. And then we got traction from the bigger publishers. First I signed with them, they sent it out to a few publishers. I waited for a while, didn't hear anything back. Emailed her, she said, "Oh, we've had a couple of no's." I immediately just fell into this hole of despondency thinking, it's not going to sell, I'm done, I'm ruined. It's not going to happen. I was like Googling what to do if your agent can't sell your book, being like, I don't know, you know, I had no idea how to sort of deal with that. But then we had one publisher who made an offer, and then we had another publisher who made an offer, then we had another one who made an offer, and then that put me in the really hard situation of having met with these 3 different publishers, all of whom have some huge successes to their name, all of whom are quite major names in the field, and looking at all of them and just thinking, I don't know who to go with. And in the end, I went with the publisher who I felt had the most evident passion for the book. It was a good problem to have, but it was a really hard choice to make, you know, to look at this and think, and any of you would be amazing, and all of you like me, you really like me, like, you know, because, you know, when you've seen that many rejection letters, and, you know, you start to wonder, am I just not very good at this? Or am I just not going to make it? Am I not going to be successful? And, you know, how do you even get your head around that? You know, how do you even acclimate to this new reality, which I have not yet done?
So what's next for you?
My immediate focus is on these books. So like I said, I've finished the first drafts of both the next one that's coming out and its sequel. And I'll be waiting on my editorial from the publishers, and then I'll sort of rework it from there based on their notes. And that'll be a lot of what I'll be focusing on. I'm really keen to sort of get things moving on the Heroes web series, so hopefully that happens before the end of the year. I've got a couple of new plays that I've written and I've sent to a director who I have a lot of respect for, who I've worked with before, and I'm sort of basically saying, you know, if either of these speak to you, take your pick, but I really want to work with him again. That's Peter Blackburn, who directed The Trial of Dorian Gray, and who has been on your show as well. Yes. And essentially I've got like a couple of other new play ideas that are sort of in the background. I'm working on a different novel series in parallel, which is sort of a young adult coming of age series. I've written the first one and I'm about halfway through the second one. It's all set in the same high school, but every book is about a different protagonist. Right. So it kind of like passes on. I totally stole the structure from my current favorite author, Tana French. And I just thought, I'd already written this first one. I hadn't necessarily intended it to be a series, but I thought I'd really like to revisit those characters. And I thought, wouldn't it be really interesting if every book, so then the first one's a male protagonist, the second one's a female protagonist, right. It'll kind of alternate from there. But I thought it'd be really interesting to explore that high school life and the process of growing up through these different voices and these different perspectives, and all of these characters, they all have their own story to tell, but they all have a totally different outlook on what it is to grow up in this kind of environment. And the way that one character sees himself in book A is not how the character in book B necessarily sees him. And that's like, I find perspective really fascinating. It's really fun to play with that. Yes. So that's kind of my side passion project at the moment, that like if these two books that I'm signed for do really well, and if they do kind of give me a bit of capital to pursue something that maybe is a little bit less commercial, I'd love to kind of make this series sort of my next thing that I focus on.
So Gabriel, where do you think you'll be in 5 years?
I have no idea. And the reason, and I'm okay with having no idea, and the reason for that is I've learnt that I can't predict anything. I've learnt over the course of, everything that's happened, like from my theatre work to winning the Ustinov to now, none of it was predictable. I couldn't have guessed that any of it was going to happen. And obviously, like having signed this publishing contract recently, it's something that you dream about your whole life, but you don't necessarily ever expect it's going to happen. Like you want it to happen and you dream about it and you pursue it and you chase it, but you can't conceive of what it will be like when you actually sign that contract. I mean, I'm already very, very lucky in that, I live off my writing work, and that's a great position to be in, particularly at my age, and I'm not unaware of that. But I would love to be in a place where, I've written for film, I've written for theatre on a higher scale than this. I've had a couple of books out that, have hopefully done well enough to let me sort of do a few different things. I never ever want to be the kind of writer who can be pinned down very easily. I would hate to be seen as predominantly a novelist or predominantly a playwright or predominantly a screenwriter. And even, in my novel sphere, I'm talking about having written young adult coming of age stuff. I've written, the zany children's adventures in Boone Shepherd. I've written the hardcore violence of the Maggie series. I don't ever want to be the kind of person who somebody looks at and says, oh, he just writes that kind of thing. And to sort of just keep writing things that challenge me and that scare me and that I find interesting, and to keep collaborating with the kind of amazing people that I've been lucky enough to have collaborated with so far, and have, who I owe so much, and having helped build my career to the place where I can actually call it a career.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Gabriel. I've really enjoyed spending the time with you this afternoon.
No, thank you so much for having me. It was an honour.
Absolute delight. Thank you.
Thanks.
I've been with Gabriel Bergmoser. Thank you very much for watching Tête-à-Tête.